The cold morning wind howled through the massive concrete arches of the central train station, carrying with it the bitter chill of an unforgiving city. Thousands of commuters rushed past, their eyes fixed firmly on their destinations, ignoring the hidden tragedies unfolding right beneath their feet. In a dimly lit corner of the bustling transit hub sat a frail, vulnerable orphan boy named Leo. He looked to be no more than 12 years old, shivering violently inside an oversized, torn jacket that offered absolutely no protection against the biting cold. His worn-out sneakers were taped together at the seams, and his face was smeared with the soot and grime of the unforgiving streets. Yet, despite his desperate circumstances, Leo's eyes held a quiet, honest determination. He was not begging. He was a survivor. Clutched in his tiny, freezing hands was a thick stack of morning newspapers. He had been standing there since 4 a.m, his stomach roaring with a hunger so deep it brought tears to his eyes, desperately trying to sell enough papers just to afford a single stale sandwich. His voice, small and trembling, called out to the passing crowd, but he was treated as nothing more than a ghost, an invisible stain on the marble floors of the city. But Leo was not entirely invisible. From the upper concourse, 2 pairs of cruel, predatory eyes were locked onto the shivering boy. They belonged to Officer Briggs and Officer Carter, 2 lazy, arrogant transit security guards who treated the train station as their own personal kingdom. They were men who had allowed the tiny shred of authority granted to them by their cheap tin badges to completely rot their souls. Holding expensive, steaming cups of artisan coffee and laughing loudly at their own crude jokes, they sauntered down the grand staircase, casting an intimidating shadow over the concourse. They had a long, vile history of bullying the most vulnerable souls in the station, extorting the weak simply because they knew no one with any real power would ever care to stop them. As their heavy black boots crunched against the tiled floor, the ordinary commuters instinctively stepped aside, not wanting to draw the ire of the aggressive guards. Briggs, a heavily built man with a perpetual sneer plastered across his face, pointed his baton directly at little Leo. A malicious, arrogant smirk crept onto his face as he nudged his partner. The 2 corrupt guards slowly approached the terrified orphan, their eyes gleaming with the sadistic thrill of intimidation. They walked with the slow, exaggerated swagger of untouchable tyrants, fully intending to ruin the life of a boy who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Leo's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against his fragile ribs as the massive shadows of the 2 guards fell over his small stack of newspapers. He instinctively took a step back, his trembling hands clutching his meager earnings, just 5 crumpled $1 bills he had painstakingly earned over 6 exhausting hours. Briggs looked down at the boy with absolute disdain, his upper lip curling into a sneer of pure disgust. He demanded to know who had given the boy permission to run a business in his station, his voice dripping with venomous authority. Leo pleaded in a soft, terrified whisper, explaining that he was just trying to earn enough money to eat, that he hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days, and folded his hands together, begging the guards to let him stay just a little longer. But Carter let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed terribly through the cavernous hall. He kicked the stack of newspapers with the heavy toe of his boot, sending the crisp pages flying into a filthy puddle of spilled coffee and mud on the station floor. The boy's entire day of back-breaking labor was destroyed in a single second. Leo cried out in sheer agony, dropping to his knees to desperately salvage the ruined papers. But Briggs wasn't finished. Drunk on his own perceived power, he violently grabbed the frail boy by the collar of his torn jacket, lifting him entirely off the ground. The boy choked and gasped for air as Briggs demanded the $5 as a fine for trespassing. When Leo begged to keep just $1 single for a piece of bread, the corrupt guard's eyes turned red with unjustified rage. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Briggs pulled back his heavy hand and slapped the small boy viciously across the cheek. The sharp, violent crack of the slap echoed through the air, instantly silencing the murmurs of the passing crowd. Leo's head spun violently, and he was thrown backward, crashing hard onto the unforgiving stone floor. Tears of ultimate helplessness streamed down the orphan's bruised and dirty face. The guards snatched the crumpled dollars from the ground, laughing arrogantly as they told the weeping child that trash belonged in the gutter. The boy remained completely silent, enduring the agonizing humiliation and the searing pain in his cheek, wishing the ground would simply swallow him whole. But the universe has a mysterious way of balancing the scales of justice, and these two arrogant tyrants had absolutely no idea who was standing just 30 feet away. On that exact morning, high-ranking Police Commander Elena Vance was conducting a surprise, unannounced inspection of the transit hub's security protocols. Commander Vance was a legend within the city's law enforcement hierarchy. Her name commanded absolute respect, and her reputation for flawless integrity and unyielding justice struck pure terror into the hearts of criminals and corrupt officials alike. Dressed in her immaculate dark blue dress uniform, with the golden eagle badge gleaming on her chest, her face was usually set in a mask of stern, impenetrable authority. She walked through the concourse flanked by a massive detail of state troopers and senior lieutenants, her sharp blue eyes scanning the environment for the slightest discrepancy. Just as she was reviewing a clipboard of duty rosters, the sharp, horrifying sound of a grown man slapping a child shattered the morning air. Commander Vance stopped dead in her tracks. Her entire detail froze. The atmosphere in the station instantly dropped by 10 degrees. Slowly, the commander turned her head toward the dark corner of the station, her eyes narrowing into a deadly, focused glare. She saw the two lazy guards laughing, holding the crumpled dollar bills, while a frail, weeping child lay curled in the dirt at their feet. A fire of absolute, unstoppable fury ignited deep within her soul. With steps as heavy and inevitable as thunder, Commander Vance marched directly toward the scene, her squad of elite officers parting the terrified crowd. Her voice boomed across the marble floors, commanding the two guards to freeze instantly. Briggs and Carter stopped laughing. They turned around, initially prepared to shout at whoever dared to interrupt their cruel game. But the moment their eyes landed on the gleaming golden badge and the intimidating rank insignias on Elena's shoulders, the ground completely slipped from beneath their feet. All the color drained from their faces in a single heartbeat. Their arrogant smirks vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, suffocating terror. Sweat immediately began to gather on Briggs's forehead, and his hands started to tremble violently. Commander Vance stood before them like an avenging angel of justice, demanding to know by what right they had laid their hands on a helpless child. Briggs began to stutter uncontrollably, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to weave a pathetic lie, claiming the boy was a dangerous thief who had attacked them first. But the commander didn't even dignify his pathetic excuses with a response. Her disgusted gaze completely dismissed the trembling cowards as she slowly stepped past them, her heart suddenly aching with an unexplainable, profound sorrow as she looked down at the bruised, weeping orphan on the floor. The tough, unyielding police commander slowly dropped to her knees right there in the dirt, completely ignoring the expensive fabric of her uniform. Her voice, usually used to command legions of men, softened into a gentle, maternal whisper as she reached out to wipe the tears from the terrified boy's face. She asked him not to be afraid, promising that no one would ever hurt him again. Trembling like a leaf in a storm, Leo slowly sat up. As he moved, his torn jacket shifted, and a small, heavily worn and faded photograph slipped from his inner pocket, fluttering gently onto the floor between them. Commander Vance looked down at the crumpled paper. Her breath suddenly caught violently in her throat. Time itself seemed to stop inside the bustling train station. The photograph showed a happy family standing in front of a modest house, a loving father holding a young girl, and a baby boy wrapped in a blue blanket. Elena's hands began to shake uncontrollably as she picked up the photo. It was an exact duplicate of the only photograph she kept locked in her own wallet. Gasping for air, her eyes wide with unbelievable shock, she looked back up at the shivering boy. With trembling fingers, she gently pulled back the torn, oversized sleeve of his right arm to check for injuries from the guard's violent grip. As the fabric slipped away, she saw it. A distinct, deep, jagged burn scar stretching across his forearm. It was a scar born from dancing flames, a permanent mark from a night of unimaginable horror. Elena closed her eyes, the terrible memories flooding her mind. 10 years ago, a tragic fire had consumed her family's home. She had been rescued, but she was told her baby brother had perished in the smoke and ash. She had a matching burn scar on her own shoulder from her desperate, failed attempt to pull him from his crib. The tough, uncompromising police commander, whose name made the city's worst criminals tremble in absolute fear, began to weep openly, the tears streaming down her face like rain. She looked into the boy's eyes, seeing the exact same shade of blue that had haunted her dreams for a decade. In a choked, broken whisper, she called out his name, Leo. The boy flinched, looking at the powerful officer in complete bewilderment, asking how she knew his name. Elena let out a heartbreaking sob, throwing her arms around the filthy, bruised boy and pulling him tightly into her chest. She cried out to the heavens, her voice cracking with a decade of repressed agony and sudden, overwhelming joy. She wept into his shoulder, telling him that she was his older sister, that she thought he was gone forever, and that she thought she was entirely alone in this world. She sobbed that her little brother had survived against all odds. The sheer magnitude of the moment radiated through the entire station. The massive crowd of onlookers stood in stunned, absolute silence. Leo's eyes widened in disbelief, the years of pain, loneliness, and brutal street survival finally melting away as he buried his face in the warm embrace of the sister he never knew he had. They held each other and cried, two shattered pieces of a tragically broken family finally stitching the pages of their fate back together. But the heartwarming reunion was quickly followed by a terrifying shift in the atmosphere. Commander Elena Vance slowly rose to her feet, gently placing her brother behind her protective shadow. The tears of a grieving sister instantly vanished, replaced by the blazing, unstoppable wrath of a high-ranking police commander who had just watched corrupt men abuse her own flesh and blood. She turned her piercing glare toward Officer Briggs and Officer Carter. The two guards were now visibly shaking, their knees knocking together, looking as though they were about to collapse from sheer terror. They realized with absolute horrifying certainty that the homeless beggar they had just slapped and extorted was the little brother of the most powerful law enforcement officer in the state. Elena's voice thundered through the grand hall, echoing off the high ceilings like the final judgment of a Supreme Court. She declared that they had disgraced the uniform, mocked the law, and exploited the most vulnerable citizen they could find. Briggs dropped entirely to his knees, tears of pathetic cowardice streaming down his face as he begged for his career, pleading that he had a mortgage to pay and a family to feed. But Commander Vance showed absolutely zero mercy. She looked down at him with utter disgust and roared, asking him if he had thought of his child's family when he slapped him in the face for a mere $5. She signaled to her elite squad of state troopers. Without a second of delay, the troopers stepped forward, forcibly ripping the security badges from the corrupt guards' chests and painfully twisting their arms behind their backs to lock them in heavy steel handcuffs. Elena publicly stripped them of their authority, suspending them on the exact spot, and ordered them to be thrown into the darkest holding cell in the county precinct, promising that federal charges for extortion and assault on a minor were already being drafted. The crowd of commuters erupted into massive applause, cheering as the arrogant tyrants were dragged away in absolute life-ruining humiliation. With the corrupt guards finally facing their righteous justice, Elena turned back to her little brother. She took off her heavy, warm, dark blue commander's coat and wrapped it gently around Leo's shivering shoulders, completely shielding him from the cold world that had treated him so cruelly. Holding his small, bruised hand tightly in her own, she guided him away from the dark corner of the station and out into the bright morning light, leading him toward a fleet of waiting, luxurious black SUVs. From this day forward, the boy who had slept on freezing concrete would live a life of warmth, luxury, and absolute safety, protected by a sister who would never let him out of her sight again. The universe had delivered its ultimate justice, proving that the scales of fate always balance in the end. This story stands as a powerful, enduring reminder to never judge a book by its cover, and to never let the arrogance of power blind you to your own humanity. The person you mock and mistreat today might just hold the power to destroy your entire world tomorrow. If this incredible story of heartbreak, righteous revenge, and ultimate family reunion touched your soul, please hit that like button and share it with everyone you know. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another deeply emotional tale, where the mistreated finally get the justice they deserve. Stay kind, stay humble, and we will see you in the next video.